Thank you for calling. Thank you for calling the 21st Century Plantation. My name is Moniqua. How can I help you today?
What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? Hey, I am back at it again with part two of corporate plantations, our slave plantations. I wanted to get that out. Again, it's going to be a few episodes. I don't know how many. We'll see how we get through it. But they're going to be short and quick because I don't want you to get bored and turn it off. I want you to hear me. Welcome to the Jelly Moose's Cafe. I am your hostess. This is your Mima's World, and I am your Mima. Hope everyone had a good Memorial Day, Decoration Day. I hope you honored your ancestors that served uh, in the war, that died in service to this country. And for all of our ancestors that did die in service to this country, I salute you. Um, all of you. I salute all of you. I honor you. I honor you. All right, corporate plantations are slave plantations. So we left off in part one was about how we got to the slave plantations and how we got to the corporate plantations. And there kind of was some similarities of how we arrived at these corporate plantations. So during this series that I'm doing right now, I'm going to focus on call center corporate plantations simply because that's my background. I've worked in 150,000 call centers, and so I know of what I speak. All right, so we are on the plantation now. We have gotten to the plantation. We've gone to the auction block. We've been auctioned off. They've paid for us. They've, given the third party auctioneer their cut of what they're going to pay for our services. We've sent our resumes in, and they've told us how much they're going to pay us per hour, which we understood that that's not exactly what they're going to pay us, but we're not going to get into that again tonight. All right. So in call centers, when you get hired and you go in for your first day at work, you usually, depending on the job or the call center or the company, you usually have about 4 weeks of in classroom training. All right, that's the corporate plantation. Let's go back to the slave plantation. In the slave plantation, when they would go to Africa and they would take the Africans. They didn't bring them directly to the New World. They didn't bring them directly to America. A lot more than you think, a high percentage, over half of the Africans went first to the Caribbean. And they went there for what they called seasoning. The seasoning they would do would be not adding salt, pepper, but they would season them to make sure that they understood what their job was going to be when they got to the Americas, to make sure kind of like they were training them to be slaves. You're not going to run because this is what's going to happen to you if you do. So they had seasoning. In the corporate plantation, or the corporate plantation, you have about 4 weeks of training, about 4 weeks of seasoning. And they tell you the ins and outs of the plantation, where you'll be working, what your skill set will bring to the plantation. So we have seasoning in the slave plantations, and we have seasoning in the corporate world and 21st century plantations as well. So now you got your seasoning. By the time you get to America, you kind of have an idea of what your job is going to be. By the time you get to the floor from training for those 4 weeks on the corporate plantations, you kind of have an idea of what your job is going to be and how you will work your job with whatever schedule that they give you. Do's and don'ts, corporate on slave plantations, do's and don'ts, things you are allowed to do, things you are not allowed to do. Well, let's see, where do we start? Um, One of the first things that they did once you uh, when you come out of seasoning and you are sent to the plantation that you're going to be working on, they brand you. So if you were going to be at the Johnson plantation, that they would brand you with a J, either on your arm, on your back, even sometimes on your face, to let other people know that you belong to the Johnson plantation. Corporate plantations, they also brand you. They give you a badge with your picture on it and the name of the company atop of your picture. Right above your picture is usually the name of the company. And then below it is usually the department that you work. So you've been branded, just like your ancestors were on the slave plantations. They brand you. So if you were to go out in public and if you happen to wear your badge in public, I never wore mine in public, no matter what company I worked for. I was not proud to work for any of them. If you wear your badge out in public, or they may brand you with a whole uniform. So they may brand your body with a uniform. Some companies give you a shirt to wear that has the uh, corporation, the slave corporation, or the corporate plantation's name on it. You may have that instead of a badge. You may have that logo on your body or on your shirt. So if you go out in public and you're wearing your uniform or your badge, then people know that you belong to X, Y, and Z corporate plantation. Especially if you are a delivery driver. We know that our UPS folks, we know that Amazon people, anybody who delivers packages usually will have a uniform, and that's so the plantation that you're delivering to, they know that you came from the XYZ plantation and you're supposed to be there. And on the slave corporations, they would have, or the slave plantations, they would again brand you with a branding. And I don't understand why a lot of our fraternities do that. They brand their bodies with these fraternity symbols. And I'm like, and they're Greek fraternities. Don't get me started on that. We're gonna stick with the topic, Valerie. Jemima, stick with this topic. I slipped and gave y'all my real name. All right, stick with the topic, Jemima. So anyway, uh, they would brand the people on the plantation, and you would also get branded on the corporate plantation. All right, that's one of the things. What's another thing that they did on the slave plantations that they do on corporate plantations? You are not allowed on corporate plantations to talk about politics or religion. Religion is a big thing. You cannot ask anybody what their religion is. You cannot talk about religion, whether you're an atheist, a Catholic, a Jew, a Muslim. It does not matter. You cannot talk about religion on corporate plantations. Now, on the slave plantations, you definitely could not talk about religion because our religion was not theirs. We didn't call on Jesus. We didn't even know who the flip flap Jesus was. We were calling on our own gods, and they definitely did not want us calling on any of the gods that we were calling on when we were in Africa. You couldn't talk about if you were a voodoo priestess. You couldn't talk about if you were a Muslim. And there were a lot of Muslims that were enslaved, that were brought here to America because the Arabs enslaved us first. And so a lot of our ancestors were forcefully converted to Islam, the way they were forcefully converted to Christianity. And so you still couldn't talk about, you couldn't call on Allah. So on the slave plantations, religion, nope, can't talk about it. Corporate plantations on the 21st century, religion, nope, you can't talk about it. Politics, can't talk about politics on 21st century corporate plantations. They don't want to know if you're a Republican or a Democrat until it comes time for someone going into office, and then they want to have a meeting to kind of tell you how to vote. But back on the slave plantation, now when we first got here, we didn't know anything about their politics or their politicians. So we weren't really talking about their politics. We were talking about our politics. But You couldn't talk about that on the slave plantations either. And as time went on, when we had wars, when you had the Revolutionary War, um, and you had a lot of African Americans that were enslaved that were going to fight for the British because they were promised freedom. So they couldn't talk about that on the plantation, on the slave plantation. You can't talk about politics on the 21st century corporate plantations. All right, that's another one. What else could we not do on the slave plantations that we still can't do on the corporate plantations? One of the things that they took from us when we got here was the drum. The drum was our way to communicate with each other. Um, and you didn't have to be on the same plantation in order to do that. The drum was kind of like our phone. I could, if I was in an ear distance of being able to hear the other plantation, what was going on, if someone was on the drums, they could communicate with me, especially if we came from the same nation in Africa. So no, you can't communicate with each other, and you can't communicate with anybody outside of the plantation. What is equivalent to that? Ding, 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 ding. I heard y'all. I heard you. You said it. The cell phone. Yes. They will take your phone, especially in call centers. They will take your phone away from you and tell you you have to lock it up in a locker, leave it in your car. You can't have it on the floor. They have designated areas for you to use your cell phone. Now, back on the slave plantation, they didn't have any designated areas where you could use your drum. You just couldn't use it. But we devised other ways to make the sound of a drum so that we could still communicate. And guess what? In the 21st century, we have found ways to use our phones when they told us what we can't. We will put it in our bra, we will put it in our sock, we will put it in our pockets, we will put it between our legs. Because 98%, and that may be a bit high, but 90 something percent of the people who work in call centers are usually single mothers. They're usually single mothers. And so you tell that mother, well, I'm sorry, but your kid can't call you. And if it's an emergency, you just gonna have to give them the main number. And if they call in with an emergency, well, then we'll just tell someone to come and get you. But we keep it, again, we'll keep it between our legs. We'll keep it uh, in our bra. We'll keep it somewhere so that if our kid calls, we have access to them and they have access to us. And now you have some corporate plantations will tell you have to lock your phone up in um, in a locker, but single mothers will have two phones. We ain't stupid. I'm giving some secrets away, so I hope ain't no corporate people listening to this and start monitoring their employees closer. Yeah, mothers will come in and give you that burner. Basically, it's a burner phone. We'll give you that burner phone, put it in the locker, and still have her phone on her. Where if her baby needs her, they can call her. The heck. So that's another thing that we have in common with the slave plantations. They take away our way to communicate with each other. Another thing that they take away from us or that they try to change is our language. Um, on the plantation, excuse me, we created different languages because again, we came from different nations, and so we spoke different languages. And when we got here, we had to devise a language that we all could understand. And so we created languages. You have Gullah Geechee language, you have Creole languages, you have Patois, you have Tatanese, um, you have Ebonics. Um, so we had to create our own language in order to communicate with each other because they tried to take our languages from us as well. So what do we do in the corporate world on a corporate plantation? We code switch. We code switch back then and we code switch now. When we were amongst each other on the slave plantation, we would have spoken the Gullah Geechee language. We would have spoken Patois. We would have spoken Creole. We would have spoken Tut. We would have spoken Ebonics. We would have spoken all of those languages amongst each other. But in front of the Bukra, which is simply a white person, in front of the Tubab, which is simply a white person, we would have spoken a different language. So again, we code switched back then, and we code switch now. So the plantation life really ain't no different. It ain't much different than it was 300 years ago. It really isn't. Only thing that's changed is how the plantations look and uh, where they're located. Because now you have a lot of northern plantations. As back in the day, most of them were in the south, but you have a lot of northern plantations now, and they operate the same way. Last thing, oh God, what was I going to say? I had one more thing that I was going to say tonight about how they were similar. Oh, oh, okay, okay, I got it. I remember. So again, we're talking about call centers. So on the plantation, the slave plantations, you were measured, especially if you were a field hand, you were measured by your production was measured by how much you picked or produced. So depending on if the plantation was a plantation that grew cotton or harvest indigo or harvest rice or harvest tobacco, whatever it harvests, you were measured by how much you produced of that particular product. In the 21st century call centers, 21st century corporate plantations, you are still measured by either how many calls you take a day, how many sales you make a day, how many calls you may make on outbound, how many deliveries you make. So you still have that quota to make. And a lot of times, like back on the plantation, they would try to make it seem like competition so that they could give the person who won something additional. Like they may give you a pass to go see a loved one. If you pick the most cotton for this week, then we're going to give you a hour or half a day pass. You can go visit your wife on the next plantation. And nowadays, it's the same thing on the corporate plantations. They try to make it very competitive. If you make the next sale, we'll give you an extra 5 minutes on your break, or you get to come in late tomorrow. They'll give you some little. Now it's really very insignificant. Back then, there were very significant prizes, or well, not prizes, but you know, benefits to being the top, because again, they would give you a pass. And yes, you wanted that pass. You wanted that pass. But a lot of times, you could be the top person and something will happen, or they'll change their mind and still not give you the pass, but you've produced all of this labor for these bakras on the slave plantations. All right, so okay, so I want to make it short. All right, so y'all got it right. We talked about tonight the similarities of slave plantations on corporate plantations. They're the same thing, y'all. They are the same thing. You will see very few white people working in call centers. Very few. Again, usually the white people that are working in these call centers and have these jobs are what we used to call back in the day PWT, and or very, very, very low income white people. You ratio is probably 50 to 5. You could have a call center of 50 people and maybe 5 would be white people. And on the plantation, you would have um, no, well, I won't even say you won't have any white people, because when slavery started in 1619 in this country, because we know that in the Caribbean it was already there before 1619, but they did have indentured service. So what you would have 50 to 5, it would be 5 indentures in the group. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. All right, so I'm gonna get out of here because it's 20 minutes and I said I was going to keep them short, so I'm going to keep them short. So until next time, people, love each other, love yourself, stay safe, stay healthy, stay black, and I'll be black again with another episode of Corporate Plantations Ain't Nothing But Slave Plantations, Part 3.
1,